Check. Check 1 2. Check. Check 1 2. Welcome back to the Mindful Hunter podcast. I'm your host, as always, Jay Nichol. And today we're going to do a deep dive on sleep systems, primarily shelters, sleeping bags, and quilts / sleeping bags. So the idea here is to do a kind of an old school series. When I first started this podcast, I was just telling this story on somebody else's podcast that they invited me on. When I first started this podcast, my idea was for more of a solo cast, and I would do kind of deep dives on gear topics and individual products. And I've done a lot of that, and I continue to do a lot of that, but it's been a while since I've done some of that. So what I want to do is, and it's going to be kind of sprinkled in with the rest of the podcasts that are coming out, because there's a ton of guests booked to come on in the near future, and a bunch of other different content on the way. But my goal is to kind of break hunting gear down into maybe 5 or 6 big categories: sleep systems, packs, optics, food, apparel, and do a series of Q&As on each category and kind of really dig into the weeds. So we're going to start with sleep systems. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. Again, forgedinthebackcountry.com. If you want lifestyle apparel focused on the backcountry hunter, head on over there. Hats, shirts, crew necks, hoodies, all kinds of great stuff. A great guy named Cody won the bear hunt. Congratulations to him. I'm super excited for that. He seems like a great dude, so that's going to be fun. We have another giveaway coming up, but probably not for a couple months. I really want to focus on creating content for Mindful Reviews and just kind of let Forge do its own thing for the next little while. However, if you want an opportunity to win a $100 Forged in the Backcountry gift certificate, go to my Instagram right now. I am doing an experiment to quantify the impact of heating fins on backcountry stoves. So essentially, how much faster, if at all, will pots with heating fans boil than pots without heating fins. And I've done a post. There's a reel, and you can put your guess in the form of a percentage difference on that post. And then next week, when I run all the experiments, I will post the results, and the individual who gets it closest to 1 decimal point will win a $100 gift certificate to Forged in the Backcountry. Mindful Reviews, online platform I've built from the ground up for people who are interested in non-sponsored, unbiased gear reviews. Head on over to mindful-reviews.com. We have over 350 members currently, and would love for you to join the community. Last note, and you're going to be hearing more of this lately, because this is kind of like the last piece of the puzzle for me as far as the businesses that I want to get involved in around hunting as I, make this transition into making hunting related stuff my full-time occupation. There are some guided hunting opportunities that I have access to. So Primitive Outfitting, I think, has 2 spots left for spring black bear. This is a super fun hunt. This is where I'll be going with the winner of the Forged contest. Super affordable, great hunts, excellent opportunity to kind of brush up on your archery skills before the season gets here. It's also, you're allowed to take your rifle, so don't feel compelled to bring your bow if that's not your thing. 2 hunts. I don't know exactly what weeks, but drop me a DM and I can get you more information on that. Now, that one I'm just advertising for Jeff because Jeff's a friend and he had 2 cancellations. However, the next one is a little nearer and dearer to my heart. So I am going to be doing some guiding for Jeff this year in his Alberta archery mule deer operation. So these hunts take place during the 2nd and 3rd week of October. And there are currently 2 openings that I will be guiding. So these are archery only hunts. They are extremely challenging hunts. And I want to say that this is not some kind of slam dunk, show up and just smoke something type of deal. This is, John Barklow did this hunt and he referred to it as varsity level archery hunting. It is extremely challenging. However, I've been on this hunt. I failed to kill. I had 2 or 3 opportunities. And I feel it's one of those hunts that kind of does separate, the men from the boys and the women from the girls. I still feel a bit of chip on my shoulder, like I need to get out there and get this done. I think it says something about you as a bow hunter if you can kill in this terrain. It's in the prairies in southern Alberta. It's kind of that coulee terrain with really steep draws and canyons. So it's kind of the opposite of hunting in the mountains. You're looking down into the draws for the deer as opposed to up on the mountains. Very challenging, very fun. Last year, an individual took a 193 deer in this unit hunting with Jeff. So there are significant big bucks in this area. So I don't want to make any promises. It's not like there's a 180 around every corner, but there is, as proven by this buck last year, there's a chance at a 190, 200 type buck for sure. So 2 spots open for that. I will be guiding for Jeff in his area, obviously with his, assistance and advice. So if you are interested in booking one of those hunts, let me know. I'm excited for it. I'm going to be out there no matter what, spending time kind of learning that area. So I'm excited to participate in that and hopefully help somebody, smoke a giant mule deer out in Alberta. So yeah, that's it for housekeeping. Let's dive into the Q&A. All right. M. Trayerson 15 says, debating between tent and teepee for archery elk, usually sleep solo, rarely share pros and cons. I'm going to say, and I'm going to talk about hybrid floorless shelters, not just teepees, because for a few years, my favorite shelter and the one that saw the most action was actually the Kafaru Mega Tarp, which isn't really a teepee per se, but it is a floorless shelter nonetheless, but it has 2 poles. I am a huge fan of floorless shelters for a variety of reasons. They are significantly lighter. They tend to have more room. I like not having a floor because it maybe that's part of what aids in having more room. You can bring a ground sheet with you or a piece of Tyvek, no problem. I think a lot of the hesitation people have with floorless shelter comes from a lack of experience. Like a lot of people, they're worried about rain, they're worried about bugs, they're worried about things coming in underneath. And I've never had issues with any of those. Obviously, if you're in a really buggy area, you're going to want some kind of mesh insert. But I have even run floorless shelters in buggy areas and not had issues. They don't tend to come in under the bottom, and you can always keep the bottom tight to the ground anyways. So listen, the pros are it's lighter and there tends to be more room. And when I say lighter, I mean significantly lighter. I would say shelters of equivalent size are about half the weight. Like if I look at last year, I took the Argali Owyhee. like a 2-pound shelter, and it has very similar room, if not more, to like a Hilleberg Niac or a Cedar Summit Telos TR2, and those would be in the neighborhood of 4-pound shelters. So you're saving a significant amount of weight. They're typically very easy to set up. Obviously, I think the largest drawback is I should also say that 2-pound Owyhee was with the mesh insert. So it was much closer to a tent in that regard. I would say the most significant drawback is they can be a little finicky to set up at first. But then once you figure out your particular shelter and its nuances, you can set them up in no time. The biggest one, obviously, is they're not freestanding. And so I have had reservations before on sheep hunts because you could be in very rocky terrain. And sometimes, the nice thing with a freestanding tent is you can peg it down, but you don't have to peg it down in order to give the tent the structure that it requires for you to get inside and utilize the shelter. A floorless shelter has to be pegged down, and it has to be pegged down, with significant force or reliability. Like those pegs really need to be in the ground. And I've been concerned in the past about not being able to find areas where I could even peg things down. And more than that, I've been concerned that, if there's a big storm, you don't have nearly as much protection. The thing could blow over on you. I feel like my experience last year with the Owyhee debunked these fears a little bit for me, because I was in at least 40-kilometer-hour winds, and that Owyhee did not budge. And I even had it elevated like 3 inches so that wind could come underneath the shelter and inhibit condensation, and not a single peg came out. Now, I had it in the ground very well, and it was in ground that held pegs very well, like really, tight soil that was granular enough that it wasn't like just clay where things could slip in and out. Like it had bite to it. So that definitely impacted in its resilience in those kind of stormy conditions. But we had hail, we had wind, we had rain, and it took it all like a champ. So I think for deep winter conditions, especially solo, I'm still heavily leaning towards freestanding shelters because of snowpack and other, it just gets a little bit more like a survival situation in those circumstances. But I will give you another example. I have a goat hunt booked this opener in August with my buddy Vance, and we're bringing another teepee. I am bringing this is brutal. I'm forgetting the name. It is their 4-person shelter. It's the Argali Absaraka, and we are both going to sleep in it. That's the other thing. I have no desire to share a typical tent with another individual, because no matter what you do, you're going to be shoulder to shoulder, unless it's an absolutely gigantic tent, and then the thing's going to weigh like 8 to 10 pounds. The Absaraka weighs 4 pounds with a full mesh insert and the accompanying pole that comes with it. So, one guy carries the insert, one guy carries the shell. You're looking at carrying 2 pounds apiece, and you have a gigantic shelter. So we're going to be up in, the same type of mountains where I was sheep hunting last year. So we have the same risk for storms that we had last year. And I'm taking a teepee again, because I thought, what a great system for 2 dudes hunting together. Lots of space, lots of protection, simple to set up. And we might still take maybe some bivvies or something to spike out with, or maybe even just a small tarp to spike out with if we need to. But I think a teepee or floorless shelter for solo elk hunting is a fantastic tool to add to your arsenal. I still tell people, listen, if you're only going to own one shelter, own a freestanding shelter. Own something like a Hilleberg Niac or a Sea to Summit Telos TR2, because that's going to be the more versatile option. It's going to be more practical in more situations. So if it's the only thing you can afford, it's a better option. However, if you're at that point in your career where you have 3 or 4 shelters and you've got the disposable income to buy, different tools for different jobs, I 100% support adding a floorless shelter. Now, I'm sure there's going to be more questions about materials and stuff, but we might as well get into it now. The other thing I'm going to strongly recommend is a shelter made out of sil poly as opposed to sil nylon. And I would argue, or Dyneema. Now, Dyneema has some shrinkage issues to it. I think some of the later generation fabrics have worked some of this out. I know Durston has done some work on this. Sil nylon stretches so bad and sags so bad when it gets wet. Like, I just don't understand why anyone would use it anymore. That was my only problem with the Kifaru Megatarp. You would set it up, it would be tight, you'd have lots of head and shoulder room, you'd wake up in the morning, that dew would be on the outside, and you would have lost like 30% of your usable volume inside because of how much that sil nylon sags when it gets wet. Sil poly is so superior in so many ways, it's not even a conversation to me. I have 0 sil nylon shelters now, and I will not be buying any unless they come out with some kind of second generation that has addressed the deficits that material offers. So Argali uses sil poly. I know there's some other manufacturers that use sil poly, but if you're going to get a floorless shelter, I highly recommend sil poly. The Owyhee is probably my favorite single person shelter at the moment. If you're looking for something light, fast, easy to set up, lots of room for the weight, it is really, really tough to beat. I enjoyed that shelter a lot. And I actually gave away the one that Argali gave me for review purposes, and I'm probably going to buy another one for myself because I just like that shelter so much. So yeah, there you go. Tarps versus shelters. Tarps versus tents for archery elk. There's my thoughts. Okay, Backcountry Unknown says a good price point for an 850 plus down quilt rated for 0 degree Fahrenheit. I've recommended this quilt a lot, and I'm going to recommend it again. It would be the Enlightened Equipment Enigma. I think it's about, I'd have to go on their website, but it's around 300 US, I think, for the specs that he has listed here. Now, I own a down version of this. I own a synthetic version of this. I paid cash for both. I have no relationship with Enlightened Equipment. I think 2 other brands that are worth looking at are Katabatic and Feathered Friends. I've heard very good things about both of these companies from people that I trust. But I personally don't have experience with those 2 brands. There's a lot of things I like about the Enlightened Equipment Enigma, but I think, $350, you should be able to get a good down quilt for that money. That's the other thing. Quilts tend to be cheaper than sleeping bags. Now, I would also recommend some custom modifications to the Enlightened Equipment Enigma. I like upgrading the external shell to 20D fabric from 10D fabric. It lets you sit in it while glassing, take it outside if you want to use it to stay warm while you're having a cup of coffee. Like, it just makes it a little bit beefier. The drawback to that is there's a 5 to 6 week lead time on Enlightened Equipment custom quilts. So order now so that it's here in time for hunting season. Bow Nose 09, need new bag, sleep hot, but always freeze when hunting in Colorado. Thinking Western mountaineering, 0 degree. Warmer, question mark. I don't have a lot of experience with Western mountaineering comfort ratings because each company kind of uses their own standards. So it's hard to say. It's a bit confusing that you sleep hot, but you always freeze when you're hunting in Colorado. Maybe it's a function of the elevation. I don't know. I would like to know what your sleep system is. Are you sleeping in clothes? Do you bring puffy layers? Do you use puffy layers when you sleep? I've been doing a lot of work around my own sleep system this year, and in fact, I will be using a 50-degree synthetic quilt for 90% of my hunts this year, because I also tend to sleep hot. I used a 20-degree down quilt last year and was kind of too hot on most of my hunts. I also sleep in my clothes every night, and I have puffy layers. So I think it's kind of redundant to have a bag that you can use independent of your puffy layers and your clothes to get you all the way down to the lowest temperature at night and carry your puffy layers and your additional clothes. I think you should look at your sleep system as being a combination of your apparel and your quilt or sleeping bag. So you also aren't saying what temperatures you're running into. So this is a bit of a tricky one. And what bag are you currently using now, and what's its temperature rating? So obviously, whatever temperature rating you have right now, if you're cold, you're going to need something with a lower rating than that. Or you're going to need to start wearing your clothes and your puffy layers to bed in order to get more out of your sleep system. So maybe circle back with me on that with some more details, and I'll see what I can do. Backcountry pillows. Also, the Z-Packs stuff pillow. I've struggled with sleeping. I've struggled with pillows a lot. I'm a side sleeper and I'm a big guy. So the distance from my shoulder to my head is way bigger than most backcountry pillows. So I tend to get this like neck crank thing going on when I try and side sleep. I have used multiple different pillows. I've used two pillows at the same time. And so what I actually have done is used an adhesive and placed Velcro straps on my sleeping pad and pillows, and then Velcroed pillows together and then Velcroed them to the sleeping pad. This was probably the most successful system I had. However, when I started weighing it, I was carrying close to half a pound of pillows and Velcro. And I was just like, that, I can't justify a half a pound. I'll figure out a better option that's going to be lighter. And I have actually gone back to carrying one ultralight pillow. I think the biggest, the lightest pillow I have ever found is the Big Agnes Q Core, which I don't think they sell anymore, but I bet you they have a version, a Repeat SL version. It's 2.3 ounces. I use this as kind of the base of my pillow system, and then I take a stuffed sack and I put some clothes in it, and I put that on top to give me more of like a comfy pillow feel. Now, I still have issues with it sliding around and kind of popping out on me in the middle of the night, and there's really no way to get around that. Somebody did just send me a video where a guy uses one of those buffs, those, it's like a neck collar, warmer that you can put it on your head, you can put it on your neck. They're kind of like very versatile, multiple use items. And what he does is he wraps the buff around a standard backcountry pillow, which kind of creates a sleeve around the pillow. And then he stuffs his puffy into that sleeve. And that creates an additional 3 to 4 inches of loft on top of the pillow. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Now, I've never really worn a buff, but the thing probably has to weigh less than a few ounces, I'm assuming. So maybe I'll give that a try this year. I think the Q Core was my favorite for weight. I think my favorite for comfort was probably the Sea to Summit. I like pillows that have not like felt, but like a soft material on the one side that you're going to put your head down. I I feel like there's still a lot of room for innovation in the backcountry pillow market. Yeah. Best sleeping pad, C-Press 247 says best sleeping pad on a budget. I'm going to say Climate, Klymit. I've never used one personally. I've definitely heard of people having issues with a few. Like, I would take a repair kit with you because they are a cheaper pad. But I've had a lot of people recommend those to me as a very good sleeping pad on a budget. I think they've got them on Go Hunt and Black Ovis and a couple other places, and they're significantly cheaper. Also, I find the cost of sleeping pads have come down significantly. I remember when I first bought my Neo Air Lite, back in 2017. I think it was like a $250 or $300 pad, especially if I convert to Canadian dollars. It might have even been more than that. And I feel these days you can get a really decent pad for like $150. I don't think you're going to get a 4-season pad for that, but you can definitely get, an R rating of, 3 to 5. That's going to be a great, 3-season pad and get you through most circumstances that you're going to run into for that kind of $150. I think right now the two that I like the best are probably the Etherlite XT from Sea to Summit and the Big Agnes Rapide SL as far as 3-season sleeping pads go. Kay Craner asks, one bag to do them all, synthetic or down? This is easy. It's synthetic. I have some controversial opinions when it comes to synthetic sleeping bags. I know Mark and Steve just did one of their Minute Mondays, and they were talking a lot about sleeping systems. And Mark felt pretty confident in the ability for his down bag to dry him out throughout the night. I'm not going to argue with Mark. I got a lot of respect for Mark, and if that's what he says his experience was, then I agree with his. I'm not going to dispute his experience. And he's been up in Alaska. He's seen some shit. So it's not like he's saying that's, from being in Colorado or another place where it's particularly dry. I will just say that in my experience, I've done a lot of deep winter hunting. I've done a lot of hunting in British Columbia. I've been in a lot of very moist environments. And in my experience, down has never been able to dry me out as effectively as synthetic. And it has slowly picked up moisture throughout the hunt. And there is a difference to me from getting dried out 80% and getting dried out 100%. And I found my down, and this goes to the same thing with puffy layers. Like, your puffy layers can dry you out during the day the same way that your sleep system can dry you out at night. And I noticed when using something like, and this is why, and a lot of people disagree with me, I'm a very big fan of the Kelvin Aerolite jacket from Sitka. And I know a lot of people don't like that as much. But when you get wet and use that Kelvin Aerolite to kind of dry you out, you get crispy dry. Like, it's bone dry. It's like your clothes came out of a dryer. When you dry out with a down bag, it's going to remove, or a down puffy, it's going to remove some of the moisture, maybe 60, 70%. You're going to be functionally dry. It will allow you to keep hunting, but it's just nowhere near the same level of effectiveness. And on top of that, no matter what you do, some of that moisture is going to get trapped in that down puffy, and the puffy is going to be less effective moving forward no matter what you do. The same thing goes for a down sleeping bag. Or quilt. What I found over the course of hunts that have been significantly wet is that the bag just picked up more and more moisture over the course of the hunt, and its ability to dry me out at night decreased every single day. And then I would wake up and I would still be clammy. Like, my clothes would still be damp. Like, they would be okay and I could live with it. But when you have a synthetic sleep system and you wake up in the morning, your shit is bone dry, crunchy dry. And so for me, that's why my sleep system this year is a 50-degree synthetic quilt. It only weighs 12 ounces. I will be sleeping in my puffy gear. Yes, my puffy gear is down, but when you layer down inside of synthetic, and I'll get into that later, you can get the moisture evacuation properties of synthetic with the insulation properties and the weight properties of down. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. So I cannot foresee any circumstance where with my clothes, my puffy layers, and a 50-degree quilt, I am not sufficiently prepared. Now, I've been doing this a long time. I sleep really hot. I think it's a very aggressive, bold move to use a 50-degree quilt. I'm not going to recommend that for everybody, but I think the principles hold up. If you're only going to own one bag and you want something that you can take into any environment and sleep with confidence, go synthetic. Here's the other thing. I always like to think of worst case scenarios. Like when I went on my first deep winter mountain goat hunt, I was thinking like, okay, what if I fall in the river? What's my system going to look like? And I had a Kafaru slick bag, a 0-degree Kafaru slick bag on that hunt. Now, is that a practical backcountry bag for most hunts? No. Have I taken that bag back in there again? No. I found lighter, better options. But my philosophy was, no matter, and I also had a freestanding shelter. I had a Hilleberg Solo. I was like, listen, no matter what happens, I could literally fall in a river at -20, set up the Hilleberg Solo, get in there in my Kafaru slick bag, and I could survive anything. And it wouldn't matter how wet I was. It wouldn't matter what happened. That slick bag was going to dry me out. So if we want to talk about like worst case life or death scenarios, synthetic is going to save your life, down might not. And so if you're only going to have one, I recommend that. Now, I don't only have one. I also have a down quilt because I do think there's lots of situations when down is superior to synthetic. But if the question is one bag to rule them all, it's synthetic. Jack Van Stone, quick review of layering of bags to move moisture outside with down/synthetic. Okay, now this is something I'm only starting to utilize now. I certainly didn't pioneer this and somebody else had to send me the information on it, so I'm kind of using secondhand information here. But the principle is that you can layer down, and we'll use sleeping bags as an example, but the same thing works with puffy layers. You can layer down sleeping bags inside of synthetic sleeping bags. And because there is a shell on top of the down, when the moisture evaporates off of your body, because here's the whole principle of using a sleep system to dry you out at night. Your sleep system heats you up. That heat causes the moisture on your body and in your clothes to evaporate. That evaporation then moves through your sleep system, turns to condensate on the external shell of the sleep system, and then evaporates off that throughout the night, moving the moisture from your body to the bag, out of the bag, into the air. Now, the reason you can't do this with down is that if the down is the external shell, as soon as that moisture kind of hits the environment, it turns to condensate, stays in the feathers, won't evacuate the system. Now, when you put the down bag inside of a synthetic bag, you're kind of creating this layering system where the evaporated moisture stays in a vapor form through the down. And it doesn't turn into condensate until it hits the external shell of the synthetic. And then the synthetic has the ability to handle that condensate not lose its loft, not lose its insulation properties, stays warm enough, and allows that condensate to then evaporate off of the shell of that garment. So the idea is down bag inside of a synthetic bag gives you the weight benefits of down with the drying properties of synthetic. Specifically, I am using a 20-degree down bag and a 50-degree synthetic. And I think with that and my puffy layers and my clothes, I can probably make it to minus 25 Celsius or minus 10 Fahrenheit, no problem. And there's not a whole lot of, hunting situations where you're going to see more than that. I'm trying to think last year or 2 years ago when I did my last winter goat hunt. Well, it would have been last year because it wasn't this winter. I saw minus 30 or colder, and I had a 20-degree synthetic quilt with a sleeping bag liner and then all my puffy layers, and I was fine. So I think a lot of people underestimate their sleep system when you start to incorporate clothes and puffy layers. I think a lot of people are carrying more gear than they need to in that regard. All right. Trap John 92. How often should a guy replace down sleeping bags? I think a quality down bag is probably going to last you anywhere from 10 to 20 years, depending on how you treat it. I've had my down quilt for 6 years, and it's fantastic. Now, the next question is going to lead us into answering some more details about this. So I'm just going to ask it right now. High quality hydrophobic down versus synthetic. Hydrophobic down will not last as long as regular down. And if you look at the direction a lot of manufacturers are heading, they're not using hydrophobic down. Now, hydrophobic down was not created for use in the backcountry. It was originally created for use in pillows for like long-term terminal patients in hospitals that were like bedridden because their head was on their pillow all day. I believe it's like a waxy substance that is applied to the feathers that stops water from kind of penetrating the feathers. Now, the issue with this is that it causes a reduction in loft over time. And so I know Enlightened equipment, one of the first bags I got from them, I think had hydrophobic down, and then they switched like the year after. And what they started doing instead was just going back to a really high quality down and overstuffing. So they would put a little bit more down in it than the temperature rating called for, and that extra down actually produced, because it had a tighter loft, a more dense loft might be a better way to describe that, but that more dense loft created a better barrier to moisture than the hydrophobic coating did. And over time, that hydrophobic coating has been shown to reduce the loft of the quilt or the bag so that the lifespan of that quilt or bag is not as long. So I've got to the point now, I do not recommend. I think it's a bit of a marketing tactic. The people I know in the industry who are like super nerd out on this are very opposed to the current iterations of hydrophobic down that we have available to us. Now, maybe a new product comes on the market. I don't know. I think more than likely it's a hybrid material like the Aerolite gel from Sitka, where you use kind of mechanical separation to reinforce the loft of the down. That seems like a more likely strategy to be successful than coating the feathers themselves. So I would say a regular down bag treated properly, like cleaned with down cleaning materials, dried appropriately, taken care of with the level of care that a high quality product like that needs. I wouldn't see why you wouldn't get 10 to 20 years out of a down bag, no problem. Yeah. And to get that second question, do not buy hydrophobic down products. In my experience, with the information that's now coming to light, I think you're buying an inferior product with a shorter shelf life. Lil Krager asks, pillows, rain gear in a dry bag works, but I don't love it. I'm with you. Addressed this earlier. There is no solution. There's no great solution out there right now. Maybe we need to start working on a Mindful Hunter backcountry pillow system. My buddy Steve Evans, how do you prevent moisture from developing inside the tent throughout the night? This is one of those things that I think is like a necessary evil, depending on the sleep system that you have. And this is another reason why I really like floorless shelters. By nature, if you are in a closed system floored shelter that has heating properties, like it's going to trap air in the tent in order to keep you warm, moisture is going to get trapped. It's like there is no magic material that will let moisture out, but not air out. Like moisture particles are bigger than air particles. So if the moisture can get out, the air can get out. And then it's not doing its job as a tent. Now you can vent the tent, but I'm going to be very honest with you. I have never been in a tent that had adequate venting to like legitimately stop condensation. You need some air movement. That's the bottom line. You have to have air movement. If you've ever slept through like a moderately windy night, you'll notice your tent's bone dry in the morning because that air is forcing the moisture out of your tent all night. And back to my earlier comment, why I like floorless shelters, I elevate my floorless shelters like 3 to 4 inches. So there's like 3 to 4 inches of clearance from the bottom of the tarp material to the ground. Like if you got down on your knees, you'd be able to look under my tent. You would see my sleeping bag, you would see my sleeping pad and all that kind of stuff inside the tent. And having that room for wind to blow underneath the shelter. I had my shelter set up like that for close to 13 days last year on my sheep hunt, and I did not have a single drop of condensation inside. And that's a single walled floorless shelter. One of the most, condensation, friendly environments you can get. Obviously a double walled shelter is better than a single walled shelter. But I think you either have a system that keeps the air inside and keeps you warm, or you have a system that lets the air out and lets the moisture out and then is not as warm. So it's one or the other. Now, one of the hacks I've used is that I carry a little blue kitchen sponge, and especially in winter environments, because when that condensation freezes after you get out of the tent, it's just a pain in the ass. You get ice crystals all over your stuff. And so it seems silly, I carry a little blue sponge. I keep it in my possibles pouch. I wake up in the morning, and the first thing I do before I even sit up, because as soon as you sit up, you get that condensation on your shoulders. Everything gets kind of wet. It's uncomfortable. It's shitty. So I literally take that blue kitchen sponge, and I just wipe the walls, and I squeeze it out the door. It takes 45 seconds, and you are mechanically removing the condensation from the walls. Barring that, you need to think of some way to let more air go through your sleep system. The best thing I have found, as long as it's not raining, and if you have a good vestibule or you're using a secondary tarp as your vestibule, which is one of my favorite options in winter conditions, is leaving the door all the way open, partially open, at least having the material open and keeping the mesh closed, but having your door open so that you're getting air blowing through that tent at night is literally the only, like people say, oh, what material is better for condensation and what tent evacuates I don't think it's a function of material or tent selection. I think it's a function of personally setting the system up to let air blow through during the night to keep that condensation down. Because here's another thing. I just talked about using your sleep system to dry you out at night. If you are doing that, you will have a significantly increased likelihood of condensation because all that moisture that's coming off your body has to go somewhere, and it's going to condensate on the walls of the tent. So I got no magic pill for condensation. In the Sticks with Hicks, sleep systems for larger individuals. I'm 6'5", 270. Pad or inflatable quilt / bag, pad or inflatable and quilt or bag. Inflatable pad, you're going to use a full-size rectangular. I never buy anything else except full-size rectangulars anymore. I've tried the mummy pads. I've tried the ones that shave a couple ounces by giving you, really rounded corners and a more kind of, athletically designed fit, if you will. I hate it. I don't do it anymore. Full-size rectangular. I think most of them are around 25 inches wide and 75 to 77 inches long. Obviously, at your height, you're kind of pushing it. The nice thing is, I sleep on my side with my knees bent. So I turn from 5'6" into 5'10". So if you sleep the same way, and most big guys do, you probably don't actually need a pad that's 6'5". But yes, full size, rectangular, inflatable pad. Also, the mistake most people make with inflatable pads is actually having them too full. That's why you're not getting as good of a sleep at night. So what I like to do is fill it up pretty full, get on it, turn on my side, and then put my finger in the little release valve nozzle and just kind of push on it lightly and slowly let a little bit of air out until if I really just raise up on my hip will just touch the ground. But then when I go back to laying flat on my side, there's a good, 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches of air between my hip and the ground. And then you're letting the pad work like a mattress, not like a brick. Because if you fill it up too full, it just acts like a brick. So there's the first question. Full-size, rectangular, inflatable pad for sleeping. And for big guys, to me, it's a quilt no-brainer. For everybody, it's a quilt no-brainer. I literally cannot come up with a single argument as to why a sleeping bag would be better in any situation than a quilt. I really think the only people who prefer sleeping bags are people who haven't taken the time to use a quilt properly. Or it's just like a nervous thing. Like they're like, I don't know. I've used a sleeping bag. I'm used to it. And hey, if that works for you, then you don't have to experiment. But I am telling you unequivocally, a quilt is superior to a sleeping bag. It weighs less. It's more effective. It's more versatile. It is a better option in every single circumstance. So there you go. Big guy system, inflatable pad, large rectangular, big ass quilt. I buy wide longs from Enlightened equipment, and those things, it's like a frickin' 8x10 tarp. It's gigantic. Parker says, what CPAP, APAP are you running at home while sleeping? That is like a CPAP is a machine that you use to combat sleep apnea. It's got a mask. It kind of forces air down your throat. I don't run one. I have a Philips Dream Station. I have it for sale. If anybody wants to buy it, it's an $1,100 machine. I'm selling it for $650. What I actually want to experiment with is getting fit with one of those mouth guards that kind of adjust the positioning of your jaw, because most bigger guys actually suffer from obstructive sleep apnea. And it actually is a function of the size of your neck. If your neck gets over 16 inches, you have a way higher likelihood. And I have a beast of a neck. I can't buy dress shirts, most t-shirts. Like when I was trying to go through samples of t-shirts for the Forged project, finding t-shirts that had big enough neck for me is really challenging, especially with like modern fit. They kind of all go with these like mock neck design that I hate. I can't stand anything touching my neck. But I want to get, because I know there's like mini CPAP machines that you could probably get away with carrying on a hunt, but it's like, I just don't want to mess around with that. I want to get fitted for one of these like snoring mouthpieces. So I'll keep you guys some somebody sent this as a DM and I forget who it was. And I sent it as a comment. So what is the wind and snow limit to a 2-person teepee better than 2 trekking style tent in those? Okay. So he's saying, what are the limits to a 2-person teepee in the wind and snow? And would you say that that is better than a trekking pole style tent or a 2 trekking pole style tent? I have seen a lot of late season use of teepees. The sawtooth is a great example. I've seen that a lot in winter conditions. Like if you take a stove and you have a large teepee, that is a fantastic option in the late season. Now, it produces a lot. I don't think it's a great solo option. I think if you're in a group setting where you can carry a big shelter, you have access to wood, I do think a teepee is a fantastic option. I feel very strongly that if you're solo, you're better off using the drying systems that I've described earlier, using your sleep systems. I think you're better off using a freestanding shelter for safety and kind of survival purposes. So that's not really a function of, look at Brady Miller. He does all kinds of late season hunts and teepees and experiences all kinds of snow and wind, but they're with a couple people. And so I think it changes the dynamics. And so I think it was going to depend a lot on what your circumstances are. Are you by yourself? Can you carry a lot of stuff? Do you got llamas or goats or something where you can carry in, some wood and some other stuff? Now, how does that compare against, dual trekking pole style tents? Here's the thing. I don't like trekking pole tents. I've had the Durston tent here for almost 6 months and I'm supposed to be testing it. When I go in with my trekking poles, I want to be able to use my trekking poles. Also, I use my trekking poles to set up my glassing tarp in case it rains. I don't mind single trekking pole shelters because then I still have one, which I can use in very steep environments. Or if I'm up glassing, as long as I've got one pole, I can do a 1-pole setup to my glassing tarp in case it rains. If both of my poles are being used to set up my shelter, and what are they supposed to do? How am I supposed to use them? This is where I think there's a disconnect between the thru hiking community and the hunting community. Because in the thru hiking community, you are never not using, if you're in your shelter using your poles, you won't be hiking. Because these people hike all day, set up a shelter at night, and tear it down in the morning, and then hike all day again. That is not what we do in the hunting community. Sometimes we hike all the way in, we set up our shelter, and we hunt out of that shelter for 3, 4, 10 days. And every day we're going out and we need access to our trekking poles. And if both those trekking poles are being used to hold up our shelter, we're screwed. So in general, on principle, I am opposed to dual trekking pole shelters. So that should answer that. Malcolm asks, best bags for the big boys. Enlightened, equipment, quilt, wide, long. Simple. Kootenai Backwoods asks, treated down versus untreated down. How long will the DWR last? What happens when it wears off? Okay, it's not, as I described earlier, it's not a DWR. I mean, technically DWR just stands for durable water repellent. So, it is a different material on the feathers than what they would typically use on the external shell of apparel. I am anti-treated down. Full stop. How are you, Mountain Thomas or M. Thomason DPT says, how you liking the Enlightened Equipment down quilt? Have a 40-degree apex and looking to get a 20-degree down too. Love both my Enlightened Equipment quilts. I think that setup is a great, like if you're going to have a dual setup, I would go a warm down and a light synthetic because just for a variety of reasons, I think you're creating a much more versatile system. So I think you're on the money with that setup. I love it. Wear down puffy first, then synthetic soft shell or other way around, drying while sleeping in a slick bag. So this guy's nailed it. Like, that is the system. If you're in a slick bag, that's a synthetic sleeping bag. So you want your down inside your synthetic. So if you wanted to add even more heat to your system, I would wear my down puffy inside my synthetic slick bag. Same system holds true to if you're just wearing jackets. I would put my down puffy on inside of a synthetic soft shell, and that is going to allow the moisture to transfer through the down without turning into condensate and reducing the insulation properties of the down. Carson Key says, best tent for sheep hunting, balance between weight and safety in the backcountry. I personally believe, because you can't answer this question without spending a bunch of money. If you really want the best single option, it's going to be expensive, because every compromise that saves you price introduces more risk. It's the Hilleberg Niac. It's big enough for a large man. It's freestanding. It is bomb-proof. Ran into Stephen Drake last year where we were goat hunting, and he was using that thing in the dead of winter. And I mean the dead of winter. I mean minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean 12 to 18 inches of snow every night. Go look at his Instagram. You will see the avalanche that came down less than a mile from their camp. We were in hell. And he was running that Niac, no problem. Now, it's not going to be as warm as the Solo, but from a durability perspective and a safety perspective, Hilleberg's 3-season requirements are stricter than any other manufacturer that I know of, other than like the really hardcore ones that people are using for like mountaineering and, you know, these type of things. Their 3-season requirements are tougher than almost everyone's 4-season requirements. Like the diameter of their poles, the thickness of their material. I always said, if you're only going to own one shelter the rest of your life, it's the Hilleberg Niac. It can do almost anything. Now, it weighs a full 4 pounds. You want to go a little bit lighter than that, have a little bit more room, and only introduce a moderate amount more risk. I would go Sea to Summit Telos TR2. Kurt Baldwin Wildlife says, top performing textiles on the interiors of shelters for moving moisture. As I discussed earlier, I think when we're looking at top of the line, listen, if you're going to buy a cheap tent, yes, then we could say that some of the textiles or fabrics are better than other fabrics. But if we're talking like an MSR, a Hilleberg, Argali, like these like premium shelter manufacturers, I don't think it matters. You want to know the truth? They're all buying it from the same place. Like, let's look at Ultra. It's made by Challenge Sailcloth. If you see Ultra, everybody's using the same Ultra. When you see 20D nylon, like all of these people are like, the Sil nylon that Seek uses is exactly the same as the Sil nylon that Kafaru uses. Like, these all come from other manufacturers. It's like poles. 99% of all premium shelters are going to be using DAC poles. Now, DAC has a couple different options and a couple different diameters, but they all make the same poles. So I don't actually think there is a functional difference or a difference worth exploring between the moisture evacuation properties of different textiles on different tents. I think you're better off thinking to yourself, how can I set this tent up? Or what techniques can I use at night to keep the moisture out of my tent? What do you use to protect your sleeping pad in the fall when bivvy camping for elk? I have a Z-Pax Dyneema ground sheet that weighs like an ounce. Like, it's insane. Now, it's expensive. If you want to save some more money, use Tyvek. That house sheeting stuff you see on new houses, super popular. Listen, you can go on Amazon and buy an expensive piece of it. There's some people that have cut it to shape and put grommets in it and kind of fancied it up a bit. Nobody gives a shit about Tyvek. That stuff is like dirt cheap. I promise you, if you go to any single house construction project in your neighborhood, find some dude on the job site and be, listen, man, I'm a hunter. I need a hunk of Tyvek, like 6.5 feet long by 2.5 feet wide. The dude will literally walk over to the roll, cut you off a hunk, and send you on your way. So the cheap and dirty option that works phenomenally well, Tyvek. The expensive option that's going to save you a couple of ounces and maybe make you the envy of your friends on your next sheep hunt is going to be a Dyneema ground tarp. The other nice thing is that the Dyneema ones kind of have a bathtub structure to them. So they have folded corners so that when you put it down, they naturally kind of come up, where Tyvek doesn't do that. It kind of just lays flat. So there's a slight benefit to the formed Dyneema ones, but from a functional perspective, it's really not that big a deal. Would be cool to see, Woolsey Jr. says, would be cool to see the minimum temps you experience with different systems using the ThermoWorks drop. I have no idea what the ThermoWorks drop is. I'm clearly going to need to experiment with that. I have documented very clearly over 3 deep winter goat hunts, the 3 different systems I've used and the different results I have had with those. And I feel like I have a cold weather sleep system dialed as much as it's possible. Another guy you want to follow is Ben Reynolds. He definitely has more experience than I do. He lives in Alaska and not only does, winter hunting, but also does a lot of winter split boarding and spends more time in those environments than I do. He has some different opinions as far as shelters and sleeping bags than I do. I wouldn't say they're opposing, but they're like different branches of the same tree, if you will. So follow Ben Reynolds. He does a lot of winter stuff, and he's a great resource. I utilize his advice a lot. Pros and cons: tents versus bivvies when temps range 70 to 100 degrees. Dear God, man, during California deer season. Well, that is hot as shit. I don't have a whole lot of use for bivvies, and let me tell you why. I took a bivvy on an elk hunt. It rained. I was inside the bivvy in a rain, and I had one of the most claustrophobic evenings of my life. I hated it. If you look at anybody's realistic bivvy setup, they all use a tarp. They all have a tarp, a bivvy, a sleeping pad, and a sleeping bag. When you do the math, the weight of the tarp and bivvy equals typically what the weight of a floorless shelter would equal. I don't understand the benefit of the bivvy and the tarp over just using a floorless shelter. Maybe I'm missing something. Now, if you can just get away with a bivvy, okay, great. But I'm telling you, I was in New Mexico where there was not a drop of rain forecast for 2 weeks, and a monsoon opened up on me at 2:00 in the morning. So I will not use a bivvy without a tarp. And when you add those 2 things up, you're better off with a floorless shelter. I don't have a bivvy in my system. I have no need for it. Some people like to use a bivvy inside of a floorless shelter in order to keep condensation off of their quilt or sleeping bag. You know what else solves that? Use a synthetic quilt, and you won't need to keep the moisture off of it. And the synthetic quilt is going to weigh less than the combination of the down quilt and the bivvy. So again, I come back. I personally don't have a use for bivvies in my system because of my experience. Loops Outdoors. I feel like they're looking for a Mindful Hunter rant on this one, and they might just get it. Sleeping bags with armholes, yes or no, and why? Unequivocally, no. I think it's a gimmick. I used the Sitka one, didn't like it. Listen, all these pictures these guys have of you having a cup of coffee in your morning in your sleeping bag with like your little arms sticking out of your sleeping bag, like, come on. I have never seen an actual person do this. I mean, Have you tried to walk around in a sleeping bag? Even that little thing they do where they stick their feet out of the bottom through the zipper and like button it up the back like some kind of diaper. It's ridiculous. When you get up in the morning, you get up in the morning. You put on your goddamn clothes and you make your cup of coffee like a man. Now listen, if you want to use your quilt or sleeping bag to keep you warm while glassing, you can do that. You don't need armholes in order to do that. The most recently released sleeping bag that has armholes weighs like 2.5 pounds, which is crazy. Costs like 900 Canadian dollars, which is doubly insane. It has very few redeeming qualities to me. It doesn't make any sense. I will go back I've said this again and again, when you try and develop a tool or a product that solves multiple problems, you typically end up with a tool or a product that doesn't solve any single problem particularly effectively. Okay, my quilt is meant to keep me warm enough that I can sleep productively throughout the night. That's its primary job. So when I buy a quilt, that's what I want it to do the best at. And I want it to be as light as possible, with the best materials possible, with the most room or the most appropriate size as possible. I want it to be defined and designed with surgical precision to do that one job super well. Now, if after being designed for that one job, it can then do other jobs moderately well, okay, great. I will take that. But when you start saying, I want this thing that I can wear around camp and stick my arms out of, have you also tried to sleep in one of these things with your arms out of the holes? It's ridiculous. I've done it. It sucks. Yeah, I'm not going to pull any punches. I think a sleep system with armholes is ridiculous. It's just, now, if you want to use it, fill your boots, man. But I think it's a marketing gimmick. I don't agree with it. I've used it. It doesn't work for me. I feel very strongly that a traditional quilt is far and away. I can buy an Enlightened Enigma synthetic or down quilt for like $300, made out of the best materials currently available on the market, super lightweight, super effective. I can wear it to glass. If I want to wrap it around my shoulders while I have my cup of coffee in the morning, I can do that. I have no need for all this other extraneous design features that increase cost, increase weight, do all this other stuff. Like, it is not effective design. It is, yeah. Yeah, I don't mean to disparage anybody else's products. If they believe that they work, fantastic. But my job is to give you my opinion based on my experience. And if you want that, that's how I feel about it. Best tent material for September to November, Idaho, semi-late. Do you spray tent with any DWR or treatment? Yeah, any of the premium tent materials are going to be fine. I do not spray any of my shelters. If it is a pre-made freestanding shelter, any of like the tents, they should be taped. You shouldn't need to seam seal them. Now that's different than a DWR treatment. If you're buying a floorless shelter, most floorless shelters, like a single wall shelter, will need to be seam sealed. So it's like a silicone type material. You rub it in with your thumb along all the seams. You can typically pay them an extra $30 or $50 to do it on their own, or you can do it. Sorry, you can pay them $30 or $50 and they will do it for you. It normally increases shipping time 7 to 10 days because they have to do it in their setup, or they will ship it to you with a couple of tubes of seam sealer, and you can do it yourself. I recommend doing it yourself. It's not that difficult. TP tents for 3 to 4 guys and stove. Backpacking, weights, recommendations, best value. Right now, I like Argali shelters. I like Sil Poly. I trust their construction. They have a new 6-person that is gigantic. I saw their 4-person Absaraka set up in Salt Lake this year. That's why I'm using that for 2 dudes. I don't you if you're going to have a stove in it, it's going to reduce the shelter size by at least 2 person. Like if it's a 6 person with a stove, don't expect to fit any more than 4 people in there. I think seek outside's person, measurement system is out to lunch. I have a 12 person teepee that you can't fit like 4 dudes in cots in. There's no way you're fitting 12 people in that thing. I think the newer companies, like the more hunting related ones, like Argali, I think have more reasonable and accurate person measurements. Like I've seen the size of their 4 person teepee, the Absaraka. You can fit 4 people in that teepee. Now, as far as the weights go, I think if you want a liner, I think you should be looking at about 4 to 6 pounds total for a setup for 3 to 4 guys. If you're going to go linerless, I think you could probably get away with 3 to 4 pounds. Will I dive into luxury items, things like mini air pumps, pillows, etc.? We've already discussed pillows. I've never used one of these mini air pumps. Maybe somebody else has some other opinions on it. I use the little pump sack, the extra ultralight one that comes with the Q-Core. It only weighs a couple ounces. It's like a stuff sack that you open, roll the top, and then compress the air into. It works phenomenally well. 6 or 7 of those bags full of air. Your sleeping pad is full. You do not want to breathe into your sleeping pad. There are materials in there that serve insulative properties or serve the function of insulation. Sometimes they're reflective, sometimes they're down. They're always very delicate. And when you breathe, there's moisture in your lungs. And when you fill your sleeping pad with air from your lungs, you are damaging those materials. And you're also going to create like mold over the long term and lots of shit you don't want to do. So do not breathe into your sleeping pads. Use whatever pump sack comes with it or one of these pumps. I've never used one. Maybe I'll try and get one. It's kind of probably not something I would recommend. Even if it's only 3 ounces, that's 3 ounces of food I could carry. That's 3 ounces of something else I could carry, and I could just use the pump sack. Ever use a sleeping bag liner or think there is use for one? I have used a sleeping bag liner. I used the Reactor from Sea to Summit on 2 winter goat hunts. It adds an incredible layer of warmth. I highly recommend it. I think there's other options. I'm experimenting now with layering the down and synthetic, but I think a sleeping bag liner is a great option for certain situations. And if you're only going to own one sleeping bag, I think a very cost-effective way of kind of doubling that up to have a dual use is by, dumping an extra 60 or 70 bucks on a sleeping bag liner, because you can add 10 degrees to your system like that. My buddy Dan says, anyone deal with sleep apnea or CPAP, and how do they deal with that in the backcountry? We'll keep you, Dan's a friend. I'll try and remember to send you a message, Dan. I'm going to experiment with one of these mouthpieces. I will let you know how it goes, because I think that's probably the best option for the backcountry. Wisco, quilt versus bag. Can a quilt keep me as warm as a bag, assuming the same pad? 100% it will keep you as warm as long as you utilize it the way it's designed. You have to strap it to your pad effectively, and you have to use the straps and buttons under your body effectively. So watch the little tutorials from whatever brand you purchase. Wisco 2525 says, are all quilts from reputable brands created equal? I think when you get up into the premium manufacturer like Enlightened Equipment, Catabatic, Feathered Friends, yes. Now, some of them have different temperature ratings. Like I have heard, Steve felt like the Catabatic quilts of similar temperature ratings were warmer than the Enlightened Equipment quilts. That could be entirely possible. I haven't run a Catabatic, so I don't know. I also think he used an Enlightened Equipment from several years ago. They could be warmer now. I've always found their temp ratings. You may find differences in the temperature ratings, but I think the quality of the materials and the quality of construction, as long as we're talking premium brands, I think are all of that same caliber. Gossamer Ultralight Pad versus Tyvek. I think what you probably mean is the Gossamer Ultralight, not pad, but the layer, like I was talking about that Z-Pax ground tarp. It's probably like an ultralight sheet that you put under your pad. If you've got the money, get a premium one from Gossamer or Z-Pax. If you don't, use Tyvek. Both will work. Thoughts on the new Peaks Bag quilt? Well, if you just heard my rant on sleeping bags with armholes, you know how I feel about the new Peaks Bag. Best setup for stomach sleepers that lay with one leg bent. I mean, that's a pretty specific question. I don't know. I've never slept on my stomach. However, I would say probably a quilt because it's going to be more versatile and you can drape it over you as you need to. Have you ever tried down socks? Yeah, I use kind of these booties from Mountain Equipment Co-op, and for deep winter hunts, I think they are indispensable. They are fantastic. I do like the ones that have like a protective coating on the bottom. You can get pure down socks, like booties, that are just like a 20D sil nylon material that you can wear in your sleeping bag, but you can't walk outside in them. And I like being able to wear those down booties around camp. I like being able to get out of my tent to take a piss at night. I like having some type of like rubberized shell on the sole, and you can still wear those in your sleeping bag, no problem. So that's my recommendation. Nighttime routine in the backcountry, end of day checklist. This is the last question. This is again from Parker. I don't really have a standard one. I probably have more of a system in the winter, especially if I'm wet. I will get back to camp. It's dark at like 5 or 6, so there's no way you're going to bed. I'll get in my sleep system to start the drying process. I'll put on an audiobook and I'll just like lay there for an hour and just chill out, relax, and dry out. Then when it's a little bit later, I will get out of the problem in winter is that you end up being in your quilt for like 12 straight hours. Nobody can lay on a backcountry sleeping pad and be comfortable for 12 straight hours. So this whole system I've developed has to do with trying to break that up effectively. So I dry out for an hour to listen to an audiobook, maybe catch up on some notes from filming, or maybe text with my wife on the InReach, whatever, just hang out in my pad, in my quilt, drying out. Then I'll get out at maybe 7 or 8 o'clock and I'll spend 2 hours out of my quilt. I'll clean up around camp. I'll get stuff set up for the next day. I'll make my dinner. The new thing I've been doing that would be really the only part of a routine is that I've added a hot drink before bed. I've experimented with some keto hot chocolates and apple ciders. I've found it's helped me sleep at night. And with the keto hot chocolates, I can add in some like powdered full fat creamers and other things that's like a very lightweight way to increase my fats, which is the most calorically dense macro there is. Protein and carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram, and fats are 9 calories per gram. So they're twice as calorically dense as protein or carbohydrates. Also, it takes our bodies longer to utilize the energy stored in fat than it does in carbohydrates. Same thing as protein. So I like ingesting my fats as far away from physical activity as I can. And that way my body has time to process them, and then through fatty acid oxidation, have those energy calories available for me when I need them next day. So the only other part of my routine that I've already mentioned is the audiobook. I listen to a lot of audiobooks while I'm hunting and podcasts, and it helps me sleep at night. It helps me wind down at the end of the day. But that's kind of the only, system I guess I have. A lot of people have hit me up and they have trouble sleeping in the backcountry, especially on solo hunts. And I had to actually remind myself what it was like, because there was a time when I found it very anxiety inducing to sleep alone in the backcountry. It's been a long time. I don't worry at all sleeping in the backcountry anymore. And maybe I'm too complacent. It doesn't bother me at all. But I think one of the best tactics I can give you is bring some earbuds with an audiobook. I typically only use one at a time. I do that to conserve battery on my phone. And I do that so that when I'm in other, like when I'm glassing and I want to listen to an audiobook, I'm not like blasting this audiobook, all over the country that I'm working in. So I do bring Bluetooth headphones, and I think they're a great addition. And I recommend books and podcasts, and I recommend fun stuff that's going to take your mind off the thing. This is not the time for personal development and business best practices books and all this. You're using this time in order to mentally reset so that you are more effective the next day. Again, be intentional with the purpose of why you're doing stuff. This is like, when people go on a backcountry hunt, it's like, I'm going to take the opportunity to lose a couple pounds, or I'm going to take the opportunity to read this business book. It's like, it's the same rant that I just did about sleeping bags. As soon as you try and do multiple things at once, you are going to reduce the effectiveness of all those things. You try and go on a diet while you're in the backcountry. Now you're in a caloric deficit. Your energy levels are reduced. You're a less effective hunter. So now you've failed to do two things at once instead of being successful at one. So remember, the ultimate goal is to kill. So everything that you do back there should be assisting you in achieving that goal. There you have it. I had to wake up at 4:30 this morning and able to get this done. So I hope that was, useful for everybody. Let me know what category you want me to do next. Is it packs? Is it optics? Is it food? What other categories am I missing? Obviously, we need to do something on boots. And I'll try and bang all these out in the next month, because I know everybody's getting their systems dialed in, getting ready for sheep and kind of everything else. So quick reminder, go pick up some apparel, forgedinthebackcountry.com. If you want to support gear reviews, mindful-reviews.com. If you're looking for a spring bear hunt in BC, hit me up. Primitive has 2 openings. And if you would like to test your archery skills in Alberta this October, and you want to go chase some mule deer with me, hit me up. I got 2 spots, guiding for Lander, Primitive Outfitting. As always, thank you for tuning in.